Hello and welcome to Abe's Star Trek commentary and review, where I am discussing and providing a bit of a commentary on everything, all the live action Star Trek episodes and movies. Today I'll be discussing Season 1, Episode 21, Court Martial. Now, I will start this one off by saying I am very familiar with this episode. For those of you who have been listening to the other two earlier podcast episodes, you'll note that I have stated that I do love legal dramas and whatnot, and this is the uh, second one. I think Menagerie was the first uh, kind of legal thing, and so it's one that I am that I have enjoyed watching in the past. Um, I do look forward to being able to discuss this one with you and to be able to enjoy this episode with my fellow listeners. For as a bit of a um, entry to this episode, uh, it is the one where Kirk is put on trial. We'll find out what for when we actually get into the episode. I don't want to do any preempting spoilers, but I will say that I do quite enjoy this one. But there are some holes which I look forward to picking on this one. So let's begin the episode and see what Kirk is on trial for. And yeah, okay. So the opening captain's log it states that the Enterprise has been through a severe ion storm and that there was some rather significant damage. Not that you can tell that from the outside of the ship. From the yeah clip that they showed of that. Uh, and apparently there's a crewman who died as a result of it somehow, and Kirk is not sure how that happened at this point. As a result of this, there has been an unscheduled stop at a starbase for repairs, and uh, we get to meet Commodore Stone. One interesting piece of information, I guess, and something which I might as well comment on here, being that Commodores are seen in one rank below Admiral, essentially, and but you don't see them anywhere else outside of the original series. I don't recall, although I am going to be keeping an eye out for this with the other series, so Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, and so on. Um, I do look forward to this, or I will be keeping an eye out to see if maybe there's a Commodore in one of those other series, but not that I can recall. And I'm wondering why, what is it about that particular rank that uh, what was it about that rank that was there any particular reason why that got scrapped? Because um, for the other series in the Star Trek universe, you've got um, NCOs, or non-commissioned officers, uh, ensign, lieutenant commander, full commander, captain, and then then you got admirals and rear admirals. Whether or not, what order the admirals go in, whether it's rear admiral and admiral, but still, Commodores seem to go the way of the dodo after the original series, and I've never really understood why that is. And I'm happy for someone to kind of post in the comments, their own theories, or if they, have any inside information as to why that happened, I'd be more than happy to read it. But anyway, so Commodore Stone, who's the commander of the Starbase, uh, reassigns the repair crew that was working on the Intrepid to the Enterprise as a high priority, and is discussing the death of the crewman with Kirk. Kirk has been reading a written report of the incident that got the crewman killed. Uh, and apparently there's a pod of some kind that this crewman was in. They were at a red alert status, and he held out to the last possible moment and jettisoned the pod when he had no choice. I don't know what this pod is or why it would have had to have been jettisoned, whether it was kind of sticking out from the ship and causing some kind of risk to the ship somehow. I mean, that part, as I recall, never really does get explained in the episode. Just that he was that this crewman that we find out a few seconds later is Lieutenant Commander Finney, um, and for some reason he was in this pod that and it had to be jettisoned because of how bad the ion storm was getting. A few seconds later, Spock is a little bit delayed. We don't know why. And beaming over to the outpost, to the starbase to provide the computer extract, which would, or the video recording, essentially, that would verify the written statement. And then Lieutenant Commander Finney's daughter, Jamie, who looks to be about 14, 15, at a guess, some early to mid teenage years, comes in and is understandably upset at the loss of her father and blames Captain Kirk for it. Again, we don't quite know the reasons there, but apparently there was some kind of bad blood between the two. In terms of between Finney and Kirk, we don't quite understand the nature of that bad blood at this point. But she lashes out, but ultimately, after she vents out what she needs to vent, Commodore Stone orders Spock to escort her from the room. So once Jamie is escorted from the room, Commodore Stone asks the question to confirm with Kirk that he was at that he jettisoned the pod after going to red alert, which Kirk says, well, he's got my sworn statement on the subject, and apparently the computer recording is showing that he jettisoned the pod before going to red alert, which causes any number of problems because whether or not that's genuine, and there's so Commodore Stone is thinking that Kirk is lying, committing willful perjury, and so he's being confined to the base to determine whether or not a general court-martial is going to be required for, well, perjury and murder. And then we get to the opening titles, and let's see what happens next. So, upon returning to the episode, we find Kirk and Bones entering a bar, or the local bar or whatever, at the starbase, and Kirk tries to greet some old friends, but it doesn't really go too well, because they seem to blame him for Commander Ben Finney's death, which really I do find odd in a lot of ways. Granted, they would have more knowledge of Kirk's backstory than we do, and they may very well have a better knowledge of the relationship or the bad whatever the bad blood story is between Kirk and Finney. Possibly. I mean, we don't know much about that at this point. Uh, and whatever that is, they seem to think that. I'm not going to put a bit of a Klingon spin on this, but quite frankly, I don't care. That Kirk has no honor, and would assassinate someone essentially, because that's what this would be. And anyone, if you, anyone who's been, I know that this is not a serialized show, and each episode is designed to be its own individual episode in its own way. This is before serialization or syndication happened. Forgive me on the term, but uh, the thing that I find um, interesting about this is that, as far as Kirk's backstory is concerned, anyone who's familiar with him and the kind of commander that he is would know that he would not willfully murder one of his crew, regardless of what kind of animosity may exist one way or the other. It's just not in his nature. He fights for his crew. He defends his crew. He will. Um, he's even offered to sacrifice himself for his crew on at least a couple of occasions, as far as the series so far is concerned. And yet they are so quick and so easy to believe that he would do something like this, which I find rather incredible. But anyway, shortly after this, Kirk leaves, and um, a beautiful blonde woman enters, and McCoy goes up to greet her. The blonde woman is named Ariel Shaw, and is apparently an old friend of the captain's. We'll get a bit more on that later, I guess. Um, and so starts the inquiry between Kirk and conducted by Commodore Stone to determine whether or not a general court-martial should be convened um, with charges of perjury and culpable negligence. Personally, I'm surprised the charge is remaining that low as far as culpable negligence is concerned, given that what he's alleged to have done would possibly be second-degree murder, um, in some possibly even first degree if premeditation um, could be determined. Manslaughter, or worst case scenario, if it was an accident. But anyway, we do get a bit of the history between them now. Um, he was actually higher ranked than Kirk initially as an instructor at the academy when Kirk was there. Midshipman, I'm assuming second or third year, something like that. And a few years later, on the USS Republic, uh, they were both on the same ship. Kirk relieved from duty, just change of shift, change of watch, and there was an open circuit of some kind and some atomic power that was left open, which whether or not Finney did by mistake or on purpose, I'm guessing it was a mistake, but still, um, it was apparently a very dangerous circuit to have left open, as it may have very well destroyed the ship. Uh, we do find out the relationship between them was actually pretty close, because Jamie, the daughter, who was uh, very upset, was actually named after James Kirk. So um, this obviously soured the relationship somewhat, and we'll find out a little more as to why. So a little further to this is that, as a result of Kirk reporting what happened, he was sent to the bottom of the promotion list, and also because he had spent so much time at the academy, he was late being assigned to a starship, and he blamed Kirk um, for his delay in promotion and whatnot, which partially I can understand to a point, but ultimately it was his own mistake, his own um, really bad oops, particularly considering we're talking someone that could have potentially destroyed the ship that they were on, that caused the situation in the first place. But yeah, so that's the history between them. Now we get into the details of the storm itself and the incident, or the actions that caused Commander Finney's death. Now we get to the first of my holes that I'm going to have some fun punching through. All right, so basically, they encounter this iron storm. It starts, rather mild at first, and with an incoming, Kirk assigns Commander Finney um, to the pod, whatever this research. I'll call it a research pod, for lack of a better way to put it, like a better term at this point, anyway. Um, and Commodore Stone initially asked, well, why him? If he blamed you for not rising to command, and Kirk says, I don't assign work based on who blames me. It was his turn and I assigned him. It was that simple, nothing malicious about it. Uh, and uh, then the storm started to get worse. A yellow alert was signaled, and then it really got bad. And then a red alert was signaled, and Kirk gave Finney the time he needed to be able to get out of the pod. Um, Mere seconds or maybe a minute, I guess. I mean, have a bit of a guess there, but um, and yet Commodore Stone is saying, well, why does a computer record made automatically at the time, state that you are on yellow alert, not on red when you jettison the pod? And could the computer be wrong? And Kirk says, well, Spock's checking that possibility right now. But here's where the first hole comes. Given, I mean, granted, I know we're talking 1960s technology as far as what people knew was or thought was possible at the time, adding about say 200 to 300 years to it, to give it to say Star Trek time. But so I'll give that part. I'll give you the writers that much leeway. But even so, the fact that no one could think that a video recording could be altered in any way um, is something that I find really interesting, because that would, being able to manipulate a recording, um, or a video recording is something that can be done, not necessarily too easy to do, um, in some respects. I mean, personally, it's not something I could do. I may be able to do these recordings, because they're fairly basic. I may have been able to incorporate, some clips if there weren't copyright issues, but being able to manipulate a recording, to show what I wanted to show, that is, beyond me. I don't know how that's done, but I do know that there are people out there who are quite capable of manipulating, images and whatnot. Uh, and the fact that, that is not even considered to be a possibility by 23rd century standards, I find to be rather hilarious, because and Kirk is unable to properly explain why there is that discrepancy between his own recollections of what happened versus the computer recording. So let's keep going. This part I do have to applaud what Kirk does. So Commodore Stone stops the inquiry at that point and suggests that let's just kind of sweep this under the rug. Essentially, you're burned out, exhausted. Um, and it was an accident. What happened? Take a permanent ground assignment, um, and that'll be that. I'm thinking of the service, because no Starfleet captain has ever stood trial before, and I don't want you to be the first. First of all, I find that to be rather hilarious. I mean, at this stage, I don't know how long Starfleet has been in existence for, but the fact that no captain has ever made a mistake up until now is laughable. Um, Secondly, the fact that uh, Commodore Stone is trying to tarnish, Captain Kirk, by saying that uh, you know you're tired, exhausted, and whatnot, and no longer fit to command, is again, wow. But Kirk says, "No way, I intend to fight. I don't know why the computer transcript is wrong, but it is. I was there, and I demand a general court-martial so I can prove my innocence." Um, and so now we know what he's on trial for. And it's, yeah, I really do find it, it was a really sucky move on the Commodore's part, really out of character for what I think a Starfleet Commodore, should, or higher ranked person anyway, should be doing. Because they, try and it doesn't make any sense because there is a level of honor in Starfleet, and what he was trying to do was a rather dishonorable thing. Rather than looking for the truth, he was basing it all on the computer transcript and not allowing for any kind of anything that would be wrong about it, which, yeah, that's just not right in my mind. So well done, Kirk, for choosing to fight. So, after the confrontation, we return to the bar. The captain's log stating that the officers who will comprise the court-martial board are on their way to the starbase. Kirk meets up with a real, who we find out is a lawyer in the Judge Advocate General's office, and starts to give Kirk some advice. We do find out a little bit of the history that they did have a romantic relationship about 4.5 years ago. Um, and Kirk is initially trying to get his flirt on, but she's not really having it. And because she realizes the seriousness of the situation that Kirk is finding himself in, and uh, says that it's going to be the prosecution is going to go Kirk versus the computer. Kirk can be fallible, the computer is not, or cannot be. And so uh, she makes a recommendation, and she says that look, if your attorney tries to defend on that Kirk cannot be fallible, and that the computer can be, that there's that he would lose, and so she makes a recommendation to meet up with a Samuel T. Cogley, attorney at law, um, who is someone that she obviously has some faith in. And then she drops the bombshell because Kirk asks, well, how do you know so much about what the prosecution's going to do? Well, I am the prosecution, and it's my job to slap you down hard and fast for the good of the service. Um, which I really, again, I don't really get. I mean, this whole situation, I mean, I do get the reason for the court martial and evidence saying one thing, Kirk is saying another. I do follow that logic. But yeah, again, it's gone way, the investigation is still ongoing, really, in terms of what happened, and yet, apparently there's still sufficient evidence to, for this to play out, in this way, which really does, in a lot of ways, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Kirk returns to his quarters on the starbase and finds an old man in there that we soon find out is Samuel T. Cogley, his attorney. And I gotta admit, he's someone that my wife would really love. Um, I like books, just not quite as much as my wife does, but you should see. Granted, our library would be dwarfed by Samuel T. Cogley's, uh, who I shall now from here on in call Stan, um, because the initial introduction between him and Kirk is that uh, I've got a computer at my office, but I never use it. Um, because I just prefer books. Um, do you want to know uh, the all the information throughout history from Moses to the and all the precedents and whatnot, and the intentions behind those that wrote them? Books, and I do. I mean, there is certainly something about books that, and I love reading. Don't get me wrong. I prefer digitized though, partially for medical reasons because um, I can zoom in on a book to make it a bit bigger, which I'm starting to need to now with some health issues that I'm having. Uh, to be able to read it, I can also read it anytime I like. I have quite the library on my phone, and in my with my Kindle. Um, Hard copy books are getting a bit much for me, for a little too small, and are just not as easily accessible to me as digital books are these days. Um, but I do certainly get, there's certainly the smell of books and the various stories and whatnot, both fiction and non-fiction, but and all the information that's out there. So don't get me wrong, I do get where he's coming from, and to each their own. But yeah, and I love the way that they introduce themselves to each other with Kirk saying, "You must be either an obsessive crackpot, or Samuel T. Cogley, attorney at law." To which he responds, "Right on both counts. Need a lawyer? Afraid so." So it's a fun introduction between the two of them. Court martial begins, and I gotta admit, I like the way that it starts. Um, with the first thing being that once everyone is essentially introduced to each other, so these are the members of the court. Here's Ardell Shaw is going to be the prosecutor. If you have any issues with anyone serving, if you feel that that they're not going to be objective, which is a very good question to ask and a key question to ask because if there is someone who would be biased, then it would not serve in Kirk's interest, or in the interest of truth, really. So I love the fact that they do actually start that way. Um, and then we get the reading of charges. So Kirk pleads not guilty to the charge of killing Commander Finney through negligence or whatever. And we get the first witness, Lieutenant Commander Spock. We get a brief reading of his service record, um, and Ariel Shaw starts to question him, and state it does get determined that there was no malfunction in the Enterprise computer, but Spock makes the comment that for some reason the computer is wrong. I'm not disputing what the computer is saying, but I know Kirk. I've worked with him, and Ariel initially tries to rein Spock in by saying, "Don't tell him, please order him not to speculate." But then Spock retaliates by saying, if I let go of a hammer on a planet that's got a positive gravity, I don't need to watch it to know that it has in fact fallen. By the same token, humans have characteristics, and personally, I love what Spock does here. I really do, because he acknowledges that he's worked with the captain and studied him for whatever time they've been together, and he knows that the captain is a man of honor, and that he would not act out of panic or malice, and recklessly or through negligence cause the death of a crewman. It's not in his nature. To which Ariel mitigates the damage to her case by saying that that's in Spock's opinion. But to me, he's got to be one of the people that's actually saying, I know him, he wouldn't do this. Everyone else is saying, well, we know him too, and we know he would do this, which I really find to be so much of a joke. But next witness. Next we get the personnel officer for the Enterprise, unnamed Benson. Um, and point of this uh, examination is purely just to confirm the history between the two, that there was a limit on Finney's service record as a result of Kirk filing that report about the failure to close the circuit. Also, that Sam Cogley has not chosen to cross-examine either witness at this point. Now Dr. McCoy comes to the stand, and I can understand the point that Ariel uh, tries to make with this, in that because of the hatred that Commander Finney had for Jim Kirk for the reprimand on his record and failure to be promoted to a command rank, that Kirk would have reciprocated that hatred for hatred. McCoy tries to defend him, but ultimately has to say that it's possible. I've always hated that "it's possible" line as far as law is concerned, because law is not, uh, or at least generally speaking, law is not about what is possible. Law is about what is or is not. It's meant to be black and white, proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And The fact that so many lawyers try to slip in, is it possible that such and such a thing happened? Well, anything's possible, but it is not evidence. It is not proof. And the fact that that Ariel is trying to play on this is it possible line? Well, sure, anything is possible, but it is not proof, and there is no evidence to show that Kirk had or reciprocated that hatred. And McCoy tried to state that, but um, yeah, it's just not really heard, which I really don't like. I really just don't get. It's one part of the legal system that I've never really understood, and just really don't agree with. Those possible lines um, should not be out there without the evidence to back up those possibilities, and the evidence is just not shown. Commodore Stone asked Sam Cogley whether or not why he's chosen to not to cross-examine any of the witnesses at this point, and uh, Sam is like, well, I just wanted to get the preliminary stuff out of the way, so we can get to the real heart of the issue, and calls Captain Kirk to the stand. And after going through a fair portion of Kirk's service record, which is fairly well represented, um, he then gives Kirk the chance to kind of plead his case, to state well why um, was there indeed a was there a red alert or was there a yellow alert when you judged from the pod? And Kirk says it was a yellow alert, it was not at red. And he says, I'm at a loss to explain uh, the discrepancy in the computer log. So Kirk starts to respond to the charges and the allegations against him, saying that there was no malice, and I did not panic. You've heard some of my service record, and I've been in many crisis kind of situations, uh, but and I've handled them well, and so I had no reason to panic. I followed the proper steps in the proper order. Um, I assigned him because he was next on the list. There was no ill intent involved. Uh, and given the same set of circumstances, I would do the same thing again because I did nothing wrong, which personally I do agree with. Um, and it just makes very little. The fact that this is all being done before all the evidence is in is just, again, I'll stop making that comment because I've made it a few times in this podcast, but still. Um, we now get to actually see the video recording of what happened. Okay, second load of holes for me. First of all, um, while I agree this may be the very first time we get to see what the control panel is on that side of Kirk's command chair, the fact that it has a jettison button there, I find rather hilarious. Um, for a lot of reasons. I mean, that should uh, yeah, that should be up to the officer in there, or the button should be closer to the pod somewhere, or maybe on the somewhere else on the bridge for Kirk to give the order for it to happen rather than doing it himself. Um, so there's that, and the fact that the alert buttons, yellow alert and red alert buttons, are on that control panel again. Uh, we never see that before, and we never see it after, with the red alert being declared by a push of a button like that. It's always with Kirk, giving the order, and it and someone else on the bridge, executing that order to that alert status. It's never been on the arm of the command chair, and so the fact that it's there now, yeah, incredibly convenient. Um, and again, with that being there, it's an image that is really easy to manipulate. Again, something which has been initially considered and rejected, which I find hilarious. But again, I have talked about that previously. thing I find interesting is that this is the first time that Kirk has actually had a chance to look at the visual playback. And one would have thought he would have had a chance to look at it beforehand, because obviously, this is where the Commodore was getting his information and where this whole court martial is coming from. But he didn't for one reason or another. And he's stunned by, understandably stunned by what it showed. Furthermore, he's afterwards, even Sam Cogley is saying, maybe it's possible you made a mistake, and I can possibly still get a plea for you. But Kirk is, no, I know what I did, and it's not right. Spock communicates to Kirk and says, I've run another check on the computer. I haven't done anything wrong. To which Kirk makes a bit of a side joke that, uh, who knows, maybe you might be able to beat your next captain at chess. To which this gives Spock an idea. Before I get to Spock's idea, we essentially get, we're still with Kirk and Cogley, and Jamie comes in, Finney's daughter, and essentially says, well, I forgive Jim, make him change his plea. I don't want him tarnished anymore. This needs to stop. But Kirk is, well, I'm not changing my plea. We're going to see this through to the end. Cogley is starting to have a bit of an idea because of this. Then we get back to Spock, and McCoy comes into the conference room where Spock is playing chess. And McCoy is at first stunned that Spock is playing chess while this court martial is going on, but then we find out that Spock programmed the computer for chess some months ago, and I do agree that if you give a computer your knowledge, it'll only be as good as you make it. Something again, I can understand the logic of that to a point, but I do have a bit of a problem with it because, granted, with the 60s, AI was something that was starting to be thought of, I guess, in very light kind of science fiction ideas, but not really thought of as much of a reality as it is today. Artificial intelligence, I'm talking. Um, and the ability for a computer to learn and adapt is something which is just not being considered here. So the enterprise computer is not capable of learning, which I do question to a point. One would think that while Spock may have been the one to initially program uh, it to play chess, that's not to say that other crew members couldn't have played against it and they could have learned from those crew members in the way the styles they played, as well as the historical matches that may have been loaded into it in the various styles of various chess greats, grandmasters that have existed throughout history. Um, and But anyway, leaving that part aside, and again, that's another rather large plot hole. And just going with the computer is only as good as you make it. And the fact that Spock was winning shows that there is some kind of problem with the Enterprise computer. And so Spock and McCoy beam down to try and get this information to Kirk and Cogley before uh, the court martial ends. Both sides rest in a split second after Cogley rests his case. Uh, Spock and McCoy enter the room, and Spock gives Cogley his the information that he's just gathered, and uh, Sam Cogley then makes an impassioned plea, to reconvene aboard the Enterprise so that the Enterprise computer can be questioned, because that is the source of the most damning information against the captain. And this is granted, and we're now down to the last few minutes of the episode, and let's see what happens from here. Court martial is reconvened on the in the conference room of the Enterprise. Spock is initially questioned about the chess games that he won and the reasons why that was unusual. Again, the logic being that because I programmed it, it'll only be as good as I am, essentially. Um, and the question gets raised that whoever altered the chess game um, would, it would be beyond, it may have had an impact on the visual recording we saw, although that point doesn't really get to be made because it would be a conclusion. However, only three people aboard, Spock gets to make the comment that only three people aboard would have been able to do it, being Captain Kirk, himself, Lieutenant Commander Spock, and the records officer. Something which again I find laughable. Rather large pothole. You've got 430 people from, as we found on board the ship, as we find from a previous episode, and none of them, only those three, are computer savvy enough to be able to pull something like that off. I mean, please, hey, I swear. I mean, it's in as high tech a world and a universe as the show is purported to be. I find it laughable that only three people on board a ship like are capable of doing that kind of technological manipulation. But anyway, moving on from that, the next question is, well, after Finney was lost, did you ever try to find him, try to recover his body, or whatnot? And yeah, we did try to look for him. And Sam makes a comment that, well, you make the assumption then that he wants to be found. I mean, if he's because you're looking for someone who's injured who apparently can't respond, but not going to be hiding. And then he makes Sam makes the observation that it is possible to evade such a search. And so I propose or that Ben Finney is not dead, making the whole point of this court-martial moot, because if he's charged with recklessly causing the death of an officer who is not actually dead, well, it's kind of pointless that court-martial's happening. So let's see what evidence Sam has um, to back that up. So there's going to be an experiment to prove um, Sam Cogley's extraordinary statement that Ben Finney is not dead. For the experiment to properly work, the ship needs to be evacuated, except for the bridge crew that needs to be there, members of the court, even the everything else is being shut down. Um, the orbit is being maintained by momentum. One of the court officers makes justifiably ask the question, well, what happens when the orbit begins to decay? And well, we hope to be finished long before then. Sam Cogley needs to go ashore, needs to go back to the outpost for some reason. We don't quite know why yet, um, but we will find that out in a little while. And let's find out what this experiment is. The experiment itself I find funny, but basically they use the ship's auditory sensors to pick up everyone's heartbeat that's remaining on board after everyone's been evacuated, barring the previous personnel that I mentioned. Um, and then McCoy uses a white sound device, which is basically just a microphone, to eliminate everyone's heartbeat that's on the bridge. And then Spock is able to, from his station, eliminate the transporter crewman's heartbeat, which leaves one left, to which Commodore Stone correctly assumes it's Finney, who is in engineering. Um, Now, because I know what happens with the rest of the episode, I am just going to summarize this, the next bit, being that uh, Kirk goes down there, so he can face Finney. That he finds him. They and Finney then lets out, um, that that he is, or at least Finney finally gets to vent out what he's been feeling. That um, all captains and officers and gentlemen, captains, all except for Finney, and it's one mistake a long time ago, but they don't forget. And it was a rather serious mistake, so I can understand why he's been uh, pushed back on the promotion list, but still, uh, I can understand a little bit where Finney is coming from, but the fact that he's not taking responsibility for his actions, his choices, and what happened back then. Um, Finney also reports that he has disabled the Enterprise, so that even if the engines were to attempt to be restarted, that couldn't happen properly. Kirk and Finney end up fighting. Um, And just before they end up fighting, Kirk tells Finney that his daughter would be on board, and that if he were to destroy the Enterprise, he'd be killing his daughter as well, which really ends up causing Finney to be distracted enough for Kirk to beat him up a little bit. You know, they do wrestle and fight and whatnot, but Finney then takes responsibility and tells Kirk how he sabotaged the engines. Kirk ends up being able to repair them, and the orbit ends up being restored, and the court martial ends up being adjourned, um, owing to there being no crime actually being committed, at least on Kirk's part. Obviously, there's going to be further repercussions for Finney, not that we get to get into that, but so ends the episode. So overall, a fairly entertaining one. I do enjoy these legal type episodes when they come along, few and far between though they are. Um, I do like the fact that it's someone who is essentially books versus a computer with Sam, and I do enjoy him uh, as a lawyer. And I think that there was a good choice there with him. So overall, a pretty good episode, and I'm glad I got to go through this one with my fellow listeners, and I do appreciate those who have stuck with me for this much of the first season and who will continue to stick with me as I continue to do more of these. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Um, while I do appreciate the views, it also helps me know that what you do like, what you don't like about these things. If you do agree with something, some points that I'm making and arguments that I'm making, whether you disagree with me, whether you like the format, whether you want me to do something different. But overall, thank you very much for listening. Live long and prosper, and Qapla.